In broad daylight, a tense confrontation unfolded as law enforcement closed in on a suspect connected to a high-profile case. Authorities believe the individual may have been responsible for the tragic death of Texas prosecutor Mark Hassa. As officers approached, the suspect attempted to flee and responded with gunfire. However, overwhelmed by the situation, he was fatally wounded during the exchange. Though the immediate threat was neutralized, one critical question remained: was this person truly behind the loss of Mark Hassa? 7 weeks earlier, on the morning of January 31st, 2013, tragedy struck outside the courthouse. Prosecutor Mark Hassa was unexpectedly targeted by an unknown masked individual. After the incident, the assailant fled the scene in a Ford sedan, leaving behind a community in shock and mourning. Despite receiving quick first aid and being rushed to the hospital, prosecutor Mark Hassa tragically died shortly after the attack. The tragic loss of prosecutor Mark Hassa sent shockwaves through both the community and law enforcement. It quickly became clear to investigators that this was not a random incident. It appeared to be a planned and targeted attack on a well-known legal figure. Authorities acted quickly, securing the courthouse area to protect the integrity of the scene and preserve crucial evidence. Officers began speaking with witnesses, gathering descriptions of the individual involved and the vehicle used to flee the scene. In the days that followed, District Attorney Mike McClelland addressed the public, assuring everyone that those behind the incident would be brought to justice.
I hope that the people that did this are watching, because we're very confident that we're going to find you, we're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in, and we're going to bring you back and let the people of Kaufman County prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
Following the incident, Kaufman County and neighboring areas quickly took action to enhance security around courthouses. Law enforcement agencies across the state also raised their level of alertness, preparing for the possibility of a broader threat to public officials. Early in the investigation, authorities considered whether the case might be connected to someone prosecutor Mark Hassa had previously brought to justice. Given the highly specific nature of the attack, the idea of a personal motive was strongly considered. Then, just 2 months later, another troubling event occurred. Law enforcement suspected that the individual behind Mark Hassa's case might have resurfaced. On March 21st, 2013, Deputy James Boyd was performing a routine traffic stop in Wise County, Texas. As he approached a black 1991 Cadillac DeVille, he had no idea that this stop would become part of a larger and more complex investigation involving a person considered a significant threat. Without any sign of trouble, Deputy Boyd was suddenly confronted in a dangerous and unexpected turn of events. He sustained multiple injuries during the encounter and collapsed at the scene. While he struggled to stay conscious, a passerby noticed the situation and stopped to assist. Emergency services were called immediately, and thanks to their swift response, Deputy Boyd survived the incident. While Boyd received medical attention, officers from multiple jurisdictions immediately launched a manhunt to track down the shooter. The shooter drove at speeds exceeding 100 miles/hour, weaving through traffic in a reckless manner. Smoke from his engine clouded the officers' view, but they successfully kept him in sight, maintaining a steady distance. The chase continued as the suspect exited the highway and entered the streets of Wise County. At one point, an 18-wheeler collided with the shooter's car, severely damaging it. The chase ended and the shooter staggered out of the wreckage. He opened fire against the pursuing officers. In response, the officers returned fire. In a brief and intense confrontation, the suspect was injured and later pronounced deceased at the scene. Authorities quickly identified him as Ebel, a known affiliate of the 211 crew, a notorious prison gang. It was later revealed that Ebel had been mistakenly released from prison just 2 months earlier due to a clerical error in his court documents. As investigators explored Ebel's history, they uncovered troubling parallels between his case and the earlier incident involving prosecutor Mark Hassa. Prior to the encounter with Deputy Boyd, Ebel had taken the life of a Domino's delivery driver, Nathan Leon, and used his uniform as a disguise. Wearing that uniform, he approached the home of Tom Clements, the executive director of the Colorado Department of Corrections. When Clements answered the door, Ebel fatally harmed him. Inside Ebel's vehicle, law enforcement found several critical pieces of evidence, including Nathan Leon's uniform, printed directions to Clements' residence, a personal manifesto expressing resentment toward the prison system, and a list of targeted officials. These discoveries raised immediate concern, especially as similar targeted attacks had taken place. Attorney Mike McClelland and his colleagues began to suspect a connection between Ebel's actions and the case of Mark Hassa. However, further investigation was necessary to confirm any direct link. Tragically, before any conclusions could be reached, another devastating incident occurred. Attorney McClelland and his wife lost their lives in their own home.
The district attorney for Kaufman County and his wife found shot to death in their home. This comes just 2 months after one of his top prosecutors was murdered right outside of the courthouse. So the big question this morning, are these two shootings connected?
On March 30th, 2013, a tragic discovery was made at the home of Kaufman County District Attorney Mike McClelland and his wife Cynthia. A concerned family member, unable to reach them, visited their home, only to find that something had gone terribly wrong. The couple was found unresponsive, and the scene left investigators deeply shaken. Although Evan Ebel had already been identified in connection with earlier incidents, the fact that these attacks were continuing suggested that the danger had not passed. Authorities feared that someone else, perhaps even the person orchestrating these events, was still at large. The question remained, was this the work of an individual, or were there others involved behind the scenes? The case now carried a new sense of urgency. As news of the McClelland tragedy spread, hundreds of law enforcement personnel joined the effort, and tips began pouring in from the public. Among them, one stood out. On Easter Sunday night, authorities received a lengthy email. While the full message was not made public, investigators later revealed that the sender had claimed responsibility for what had happened to the McClellands and made additional threats unless a specific county judge stepped down. In response, investigators engaged with the sender. They acknowledged the claims, but noted that many of the details could have come from media coverage. To verify the sender's authenticity, law enforcement requested information only the true perpetrator would know. But after that initial interaction, the messages stopped. It was unclear whether this was a legitimate lead from someone involved or simply a false claim meant to mislead investigators. At the time, law enforcement also explored the possibility of connections to groups Evan Ebel had been associated with, but without further communication, those leads began to fade. Despite the uncertainty, authorities remained on high alert. Concerned about the potential for more coordinated attacks, investigators worked tirelessly. In reviewing surveillance footage from local businesses near the McClelland residence, they noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria speeding through the area, offering a possible clue in a case filled with unanswered questions. While reviewing surveillance footage near the McClelland residence, investigators noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria moving quickly through the area. The vehicle closely resembled one that had previously been seen leaving the vicinity where Mark Hassa had been attacked. At the same time, a separate team of investigators began reviewing past cases involving both Mike McClelland and Mark Hassa. It was during this process that a new person of interest emerged. Eric Williams, a former justice of the peace and a member of the local Masonic Lodge. Eric Williams had once been respected for his intelligence and legal knowledge. However, his professional reputation suffered due to accusations of misconduct. In 2011, he was caught on security footage removing courthouse computers without proper authorization. This led to legal consequences and a conviction for unauthorized removal of government property. When questioned, Williams claimed he had permission to take the equipment. However, investigators presented surveillance evidence and eyewitness statements that contradicted his explanation. Though his motives remained unclear, some believed he may have sought access to legal files. Williams was offered a plea deal that could have reduced the charge to a misdemeanor. Instead, he chose to contest the case in court. The prosecution, led by Mark Hassa and supported by Mike McClelland, pursued the case, and Williams was ultimately found guilty. During the trial, Hassa and McClelland were firm in their criticism. Hassa described Williams as having violated public trust, while McClelland reportedly expressed disappointment in how a public official had handled his duties. The court sentenced Williams to 2 years of probation, but the most significant consequence was not the sentence itself. It was the long-term impact on his career. As a result of the conviction, he lost his official role and had his law license revoked. This outcome was a heavy blow for someone who had held a respected position. The investigators reached out to Williams for questioning, but on legal advice, he chose not to engage with them. Interestingly, while he remained silent with law enforcement, he was outspoken in interviews with the media, sharing his views as the investigation progressed.
My heart goes out to all the families that have been affected by this tragedy, and especially to the people that work at the courthouse. I worked there for several years while I was going to law school, and so I know that it's a tight-knit family and that this is devastating to them.
What's it make you feel like knowing that you've been somehow wrapped up in this?
It actually makes me feel that the police are doing the thorough job they need to.
While Eric continued to appear in media interviews, investigators remained focused on him as their primary person of interest. However, they were puzzled to find no official record linking him to the White Crown Victoria seen in surveillance footage. Then, on April 11th, 12 days after the tragic loss of Mike and Cynthia McClelland, everything took an unexpected turn. Eric dismissed his legal team and reached out to authorities, expressing a willingness to speak with them. Investigators responded immediately, heading to his home to begin the conversation.
Can you understand why your name pops up in all this?
Absolutely.
Well, did you have anything to do with it?
No, absolutely not.
It came as no surprise that Eric Williams strongly denied any connection to the murders. During the interviews, police uncovered that for 2 years following the loss of his law license, Eric had been earning a living by selling firearms. However, as a convicted felon, he was legally prohibited from owning or selling guns. Despite this, detectives were unable to search his home without clear legal grounds or his consent.
I guess we could just look in there real quick.
With a subtle expression, Eric Williams agreed to the search, confident that he had taken precautions to cover his tracks. However, as investigators examined his home, they discovered various items associated with firearms and tactical gear. When questioned about the missing firearms, Williams claimed that he had sold all but one of his 16 guns, which he insisted was no longer in his possession. Investigators were not convinced, especially since his house still contained firearm accessories. Among his belongings, they also found a taser. While it wasn't enough to charge him on its own, it raised suspicions about Williams's intentions. He had previously stated that he had sold nearly all of his firearms, yet still retained a taser and other related equipment. This raised questions about whether he was truly distancing himself from firearms or was still preparing for something. Though detectives did not have sufficient cause to bring him in for questioning, they managed to obtain a search warrant for his home. On April 12, 2013, investigators from Kaufman County, along with the FBI, conducted a thorough search of Eric Williams's home. What they uncovered exceeded their expectations. In his garage, they found a filing cabinet containing the registration for a white Ford Crown Victoria, the same make and model of car seen near the crime scenes. This discovery directly connected Williams to the vehicle linked to the incidents, but that wasn't the only significant find. Inside the same cabinet, investigators found a piece of paper with login information for an anonymous tip website. After investigating, they discovered that Williams had been using this site to send misleading messages to authorities, even taking credit for the crimes and taunting law enforcement in the process. This evidence was enough to strengthen the case against him, and Williams was arrested on charges related to making a terroristic threat. At this point, he had not been officially named a suspect in the murders, but that was soon to change. Roger, a former acquaintance of Eric Williams, unknowingly played a role in his plans. In November 2012, Williams convinced Roger to rent a storage unit under his name, keeping his identity off the records. At the time, Roger had no idea what Williams intended to use the unit for. After hearing about the search of Williams's home, Roger grew suspicious and contacted law enforcement, leading investigators to the storage unit. Inside, they discovered the white Ford Crown Victoria, along with police uniforms, badges, bulletproof vests, and various weapons, including knives, a crossbow, multiple firearms, and a significant amount of ammunition. The most concerning discovery was several jars containing homemade substances. Forensic tests were conducted on some of the firearms as well as a bullet recovered from a separate bag. The results showed that the bullet matched shell casings from the crime scenes, linking it to the same type of weapon used in the deaths of Mike and Cynthia McClelland. However, none of the recovered firearms could be definitively tied to the murders. While this was a setback, it wasn't a barrier to progress. Prosecutors remained determined, and the case continued to build. By April 18, 2013, Eric Williams was officially charged with 3 counts of capital murder. The trial was split into 2 phases: the guilt phase, where the jury would determine if he was guilty, and the penalty phase, where they would decide the appropriate sentence. The guilt phase began in December 2014, with prosecutors focusing on the murder of Mike McClellan's wife. They argued that this was a calculated act of revenge and presented evidence of Williams's attempts to manipulate the investigation. Surveillance footage from the storage unit helped to build a timeline linking Williams to the crime scene. The defense, however, challenged the prosecution's case, pointing out that there was no direct evidence, such as a murder weapon or an eyewitness, that could conclusively place Williams at the McClellan home. They argued that this created reasonable doubt. Ultimately, it was up to the jury to decide. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, they reached their verdict.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Eric Lyle Williams, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
With the guilty verdict reached, the trial proceeded to the penalty phase, where the prosecution introduced crucial testimony. Kim Williams, Eric's wife and the alleged accomplice, had been arrested alongside him in 2013. Initially, she stood by her husband during her interrogation, but eventually she agreed to cooperate with authorities. In exchange for a plea deal, she decided to testify against Eric during the penalty phase. Kim spoke about Eric's deep desire for revenge, his careful planning, and his unsettling lack of remorse. She described how he had prepared for the McClellan incident with great precision, even planning his disguise to avoid detection. The night before the event, Eric had shown Kim the outfit he intended to wear, a bulletproof vest labeled Sheriff. Kim also shared that McClellan's wife had not been the intended target, but Eric had made the decision that no witnesses should remain, considering her death as a necessary part of the plan. When asked to describe Eric's perspective on what happened to McClellan's wife, her response was chilling.
He told me that he had to shoot her an extra time because she was still moaning.
Eric Williams' unsettling behavior didn't stop there. Later that night, after the tragic events involving Mike and Cynthia McClellan, Eric and his wife went to her parents' house, where they appeared unfazed and spent time together, cooking steaks as if nothing had occurred. During the trial, the jury was shocked to learn about the incident involving Assistant District Attorney Mark Hassa. Kim, who had played a role in the event, admitted that she was the one driving when Eric was involved in the incident with Hassa in broad daylight. When asked why she agreed to drive, her answer was blunt. "I was under the influence, and I believed in Eric." His anger felt like my own. She described their departure after the event, mentioning that Eric seemed pleased, and she shared that sense of satisfaction. Kim's testimony also uncovered even more troubling details. She recalled an instance when Eric had taken her to a bridge and disposed of a bag into the water below. That bag, which was recovered after a prolonged search, turned out to be something more significant than they had anticipated. It was a Halloween mask, the same one Eric had worn during the incident involving Mark Hassa. Inside the mask, police found 2 revolvers, one of which was confirmed to be linked to the crime involving Hassa. But perhaps the most unsettling revelation came when Kim disclosed that Eric had a list of individuals he intended to target, with a judge being next. Eric had plans that involved making the next incident more personal. He mentioned to Kim that he intended to use a crossbow in the attack on Judge Glenn Ashworth, and that he planned to cause harm in a very disturbing way. When asked for clarification, Kim hesitated before revealing that Eric had said it involved a harmful substance. Despite the defense's efforts to present character witnesses, the damage had already been done. The jury had heard all the details, and the truth of Eric Williams's actions became clear. On December 17, 2014, Eric Williams was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As of November 2024, Eric Williams remains on death row, still appealing his conviction. Kim Williams, who pleaded guilty in connection with the crime, is serving a 40-year prison sentence. While justice has been served, the effects of Eric Williams's actions continue to impact the Kaufman County community. What are your thoughts on this case? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.